Hi, this is Brendan Davis again from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog. I had mentioned that I wanted to do a video on evil adventuring parties, and so I thought I'd take a crack at it today. I might broaden the topic a little bit and discuss evil characters in general, and just sort of like lines that we set for ourselves in games, and what some might find acceptable, what some might not find acceptable. For me personally, if I'm honest about what I prefer, I think I tend to like playing evil characters more than good characters, and I also think as a GM, I tend to prefer evil parties to good parties. Now that doesn't mean I want a party of rampaging lunatics. It just means I don't know. I find them more interesting, more compelling. I do. I'm the sort of person. I grew up watching a lot of Hammer movies, a lot of horror movies as a kid. I always liked villains. So when in the '90s, I loved going to see guys like Gary Oldman and Alec Rickman. Alan Rickman. Whenever they were in a new villain role, which seemed to be most of the roles they got at the time, and Vincent Price, people like that. I've always just found those kinds of actors and characters more interesting than the heroes. Mafia movies are another one. Goodfellas is probably my favorite movie, and those characters are pretty bad. The Sopranos, same thing. I just find that kind of stuff interesting. I think in recent years maybe we've gone a little overboard with some of it. It seems like you can't turn around without seeing an evil anti-hero or something like that. But generally speaking, when you're not saturated in it, that's what I would tend to lean towards. And in my gaming, it's the same thing. When we made Crime Network, I basically the reason why I made that was because number one, I like mob movies, but number two, I think that evil parties just generate a lot of excitement. They're always doing things that are creating complications, and they always have schemes going on, and they're amusing. I think there's a reason why in movies and books the good guys often don't get the laugh lines. It's the villains that get them because they're breaking rules, and when you break rules, it's they can go into territory that I think other people can't go without losing our sympathies. And you see the same thing in martial arts movies. A lot of these a lot of the villains, or even just some of the eccentric sidekicks, or really cross some bright red lines and make a joke out of it. And I think it's just one of these things where there's something cathartic about someone doing that. It's a little bit like comedy or an action movie. There's a catharsis involved, and so in gaming, I think it's the same thing. It's a when you play an evil character, you could be a real mild mannered totally level headed person that wouldn't harm a fly, but in a game, you're doing things that you would never do in real life. I think it's fairly harmless catharsis in the same way that a dungeon delve is. You're playing a good guy a lot of the times in a dungeon delve, but there's a cathartic element to sort of the hack and slash component that goes there. So for me, I don't think there's an issue with it. I can certainly understand some people don't like it, and some people might actually be bothered by it. It might trouble them to be in a group where people are playing evil characters. And anytime you're playing evil characters, you certainly need to feel the room and know what's acceptable and what isn't, and maybe even have some talks. I ran a campaign recently where there was some pretty brutal evil characters in it. I'll try to put a link there. It's my Bonebreaker campaign. I forget what I called it in the campaign log. I probably called it something of the Demon Moon Cult, but I just in casual conversation would refer to it as the Bonebreaking Sect campaign, and they were pretty bad. And so I would occasionally ask players, "Is this okay? Is that okay?" What we don't, just because I wanted to know, and I didn't want anyone being uncomfortable. And I do think that if you sense that. If you sense it, sure, you need to, it's something that you should address. but I think by and large, I don't think it's, I've never really had an issue with it, and I don't encounter too many people that do. And usually when I do, they'll mention it. When we put out even our game Servants of Gaius, which you're not technically playing an evil party, but it makes Caligula into the hero of the setting, which is obviously uh, a little bit of a morally questionable thing to do, and so I heard from people who just wouldn't play the game or were uncomfortable enough with the concept that they didn't want to touch it, and I can respect that. I don't have an issue with that. Me, I don't care. I love stuff like that. I think it's when I watched I Claudius, Caligula is my favorite character. I will sometimes go back and just watch the Caligula episodes and leave out all the other stuff, just because I think John Hurt was so amazing in that role, and I think the relationship between Caligula and Claudius, it was just this really interesting uncle and nephew relationship that I thought they handled really well, and again, I mean Caligula in that. And that version of Caligula was just hysterical. It was over the top, but they did it on purpose, and they definitely had fun with some of the source material. But again, for a lot of people, Servants of Gaius was too over the line, and I can understand why people might feel that way. But for me, I just thought it was a fun, way to handle Caligula. And it also really set the stage for interesting campaigns. It was a very good concept for gameability. But with Crime Network, it was somewhat similar. I mean, you're playing mobsters, and they're not just crossing lines; they're murdering people. They're doing all kinds of horrible stuff. I mean, if anybody's a fan of The Sopranos, and you watched it over the course of the entire series, you remember they would occasionally remind you, because you'd really get drawn in and start liking these characters, but they'd have them do things that would remind you, no, this is a bad person. Now I think in gaming, it's same thing, but yeah, but I don't think it's a problem. I don't think playing evil characters is a problem either in terms of affecting people's regular daily lives. Again, it's a fantasy. It's no different than when I was a kid. I was really into heavy metal music, and one of my favorite bands was Iron Maiden. But I never mistook the Number of the Beast for something where I needed to actually go out and emulate that, and the same thing, even when you had bands that were more sincere maybe about some of their getting into some of the sort of satanic stuff. It was just, for me, it just was fantasy. It wasn't anything to be taken seriously. And so I think with movies, books, RPGs, it's also kind of the same thing. There are certainly things I wouldn't want to do in a game too, so I can understand setting boundaries for yourself. But playing an evil character who murders halflings or something, I don't know. That's not. I don't think that's a big deal. And I'd much rather play that guy than play the paladin personally. I know a lot of people who can play an excellent paladin. Nothing against paladins, but you don't want me playing a paladin. I suck at playing paladins. I tried playing a priest in a White Wolf game that was like a good guy. He was based on the dad from what was the TV show, The Wonder Years, and so he was just like a priest at a mega church or something like that, and he just went south really quick. I couldn't. He's still kind of a good guy, but I had trouble really keeping that going. I can play good characters if they're a little more gray, but that was just too much for me. So yeah, with campaigns, I think that evil parties just really lend themselves well to keeping the flow moving and just keeping things interesting. Again, I'll link to the log, but my Bonebreaker campaign, I had no trouble keeping. That campaign was self-sustaining because they were just always breaking stuff, and when players break things, uh, you know, it really helps the campaign grow in a lot of ways, and a lot of the stuff they were breaking, it was stuff that good character, they were doing things good characters don't do. They were not heroes by any stretch of the imagination at all. They were really they were a group of really wicked characters. But we all had fun, and I used a lot of that material in the Leaf On book when I started working on it. So yeah, so I think there's that. I also think sometimes we take, again, I guess my point of view with games is they're a pastime, they're an escape, they're not something that I don't overthink what's going on in the game. Now obviously if someone's uncomfortable, that's a different story. Like if I have a player who's playing an evil character and I can see another player is not on the same wavelength and is having trouble with it, that's a much different case. I don't want anybody at my table to be uncomfortable. But I'm not worried about people's spiritual well-being if they decide to play an evil character, that it's gonna that it's gonna bleed over in other aspects of their lives. Now if it's a psychopath who's just prone to doing bad stuff anyway, yeah, sure. Like I when I was a kid, we had a guy like that in one of our groups, and at one point he picked me up and threw me on the ground because of something that happened in the game. But that's the kind of person, no matter what we did, he was just a psychopath. I mean, he would just do things like that. Whether we were talking about basketball, whether we were, playing cards or collecting garbage pail kids, that kid was, prone to violence. And I think for most people, I would argue, and again, I'm not an expert, but I just, based on what I've seen, playing a game like this where you're able to kind of go in for a little bit, blow off some steam by hacking up some goblins or whatever, is cathartic and probably a good release. I don't think it encourages more violence. I think it would reduce the desire for it. Just like, I mean, when I was a kid, again, I listened to heavy metal, and that was something that sort of had a reputation for making you aggressive and mean. And now we're finding out that listening to heavy metal music calms you down. It's like it's practically meditative at this point, I think. So I don't know. I just I like evil characters. I think they're engaging and exciting, and I don't think there's an issue with it in games, and I think that's reflected in the games we've made. Whether it's Crime Network, Servants of Gaius, even Sartorius, and Wandering Heroes of Ogre Gate. Like when I run a campaign, there's very rarely will it be a cast of all good guys. It's not always a cast of bad guys, but it's usually there's usually a lot of gray and guys that are just more destructive for the setting, and I like running that kind of a group. So for me, it's not an issue. But yeah, that's my thoughts. I apologize if I'm a little bit low energy today. Like I said in my last video, I went to Salem yesterday, and that kind of I don't know. I just sucked some of the energy out of me. So anyways, I will hopefully have a video here on. I want to do another video on history and RPGs, and I want to talk about maybe some of the issues that can creep up there, and hopefully get a good discussion going. I think there's a lot of. I don't want this to be like something where I'm saying a bunch of stuff and people just sort of either accept it and agree with it, or just get really mad and shut me down. I want it to be kind of a conversation. So I think on the history front especially, I'd really like to hear what other people have to say. So even though it wasn't the topic of this video, if you have anything regarding history you'd like me to address, certainly feel free to mention it in the comments. And I'll post some links to the Bonebreaker campaign and things like that. I think I also have a blog entry on evil parties, so I might post that as well. All right, goodbye.